All right. I want to just thank you, Maina. And Maina Dubetz is here with us up there. Maina, if you want to just nod your head. And Maina is a client of mine. She's finishing her first book, and it has autobiographical elements in it. She's been a nurse for 30 years, and her book is entitled When Death Comes Knocking for Your Patients. So she has quite a bit of experience, obviously, working with palliative care patients, and she has written a book for new nurses, and we're excited about it coming out and being published. And she's come here just to talk with Phyllis Barber, me and Phyllis Barber, about issues of privacy when it comes to autobiographical writing and memoir. So, Phyllis, thank you so much for coming to us from Park City, Utah. And by the way, Maina is from Calgary, Canada, right?
Oh, wonderful.
From Canada.
I like Canadians.
I love Canadians myself. I'm glad that I have global clients around the globe. So Phyllis Barber, just for those of you who may not know her work, is a very well-published memoirist. She's actually written 3 memoirs, one of which I know very well because I wrote about it in my own book, Faithful Transgressions in the American West. And I was fascinated by how I got cultured, not only because it is a hilarious coming-of-age story. I'm telling you, I think it is actually one of the most humorous, funniest, drop-down laughing memoirs that I have ever read. And that's how I got familiar with Phyllis Barber's work. And she's also then written 2 other memoirs, Raw Edges, and her most recent one in the trilogy of memoirs, To the Mountain, One Mormon Woman's Search for Spirit. And I haven't read that one, but I have read Raw Edges in one version of it. And so I'm really excited to talk with you today, Phyllis. I want everybody to know that you now live in Park City, Utah, and you're just recently have had a 35-year career writing novels, short stories, essays, poems, all sorts of things. But today I want to tap you for your great experience, both teaching creative nonfiction at Vermont College of Fine Arts, MFA, in the writing program for about 20 years. You were there and you just recently retired, right? So you're a real expert on this topic, which is why I came to you to ask you some questions, because there are certain things that keep coming up in my particular business because I work with people who are writing stories about themselves, or either as an autobiography or memoir, or they're business people, and they're writing about their experience in business. And one thing that continues to come up almost constantly, and I even read a manuscript this morning, or was reading one, is the issue of privacy and how much you tell or don't tell, because of course the story of your life is never just the story about your life, it's the story about other people's lives. You can't tell your life story without telling something about other people, right?
Right.
So Phyllis, my first question before we get into that is just, how do you distinguish between autobiography and memoir? If you want to just give us a quick distinction there yourself.
Well, for me, an autobiography is more about a linear look at somebody's life. Mm-hmm. I was born in such a place, and I grew up and I went to this high school and that college. Autobiography is not as personal to me as memoir. And memoir can be about a slice of life, or can be about a part of your life. Autobiography implies to me a longer life. Mm-hmm. And memoir can be, again, your feelings about a certain issue. Mm-hmm. It's just a more personal look into one's personal story, but it's very much one person's view of the world.
Okay, great. And you've written 3 of those. And so the main reason that I came to talk with you today, and Maina also, is to have you let us know what are some of the strategies that you've used to deal with any issues of privacy that you've come up against in any of your autobiographical writing.
Well, in the first memoir, How I Got Cultured, I was very naive. And I didn't ask anybody anything. But I don't think anybody got it wasn't as deep a look at certain things. It was more a look at certain issues and how they had affected my life. Mm-hmm. Raw Edges was a different story altogether. And that's why I went to get this book. But in the beginning of the book, where they have all the, university copyright information. I said, some names and places in this book have been changed to respect the privacy of certain individuals. With regard to immediate family members whose names I couldn't change, I wish to acknowledge they've been represented by brushstrokes only, and those from my paintbrush rather than their own. So, to me, memoir is about really saying, this is my point of view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
This is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
There we are.
Yeah.
This is not the truth about how everything works. This is
Mm-hmm.
how I saw it. This is how it affected me.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been my main strategy, is to say, this is my point of view.
And you make that explicit in the front of all of your books. I can't remember if you did in How I Got Cultured, but
I did in the last two.
You did in the last two. And to me, just so everybody knows, How I Got Cultured actually does have some, the reason I focused on it, on How I Got Cultured, is because I think, Phyllis, you took on issues of Mormon women's sexuality in a way that no one had before, because you're talking about being a Mormon growing up in Las Vegas, of all places, and you wanted to be a rhythmette. And by the way, Phyllis is also a concert pianist and has given a classical pianist, given concerts, and that's one of her other loves, and which you were doing before you became a writer, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about that in your book. So there were still, though, I think, things that could have been controversial or that you might have been a little sensitive to when you were talking about your parents, because you were taking a bit of a satirical view, at least, or a hard view at Mormonism, at some of the morality of Mormonism, and your what I would say difficult place between being this good girl Mormon and someone who wanted to be a Las Vegas rhythmette. Damn, right?
They were good girls. I mean, I will say that they were very nice girls. It was a high-class group.
Oh, I'm sure. And did you worry a little bit about what your parents would think about your writing in that book?
At the time, I was not involved in Mormonism. I was breaking away from it, and so I didn't care what they thought.
One way or the other.
But the thing my mother was most upset with, I never, ever would have imagined. So I had somebody taking the frame off of a picture of Joseph Smith, who was the founder of Mormonism, and moving it, hanging it somewhere else so they could hang their clothes on that nail. And she just thought that was terrible. So anyway, but for the other things, I didn't care at the time. So I've gotten, so I care more.
Yeah. I know that some of my clients, Phyllis, when I've actually had clients stop working with me, not because they didn't like me, of course, but because they were actually afraid, or their family members told them if they wrote that story, they would be extremely unhappy, because often those were stories related to someone surviving abuse.
All right.
They're writing the story to help other people. And I had a client like that, and I have other clients who are in the midst of writing books in which issues like that, either of their own experience or others, usually it's connected, and they're struggling to know how to deal with that. So one thing that you're saying that people can do in that case is say, this is from my perspective. You can frame your story in that way. Are there other things that they can do also that you would suggest?
Well, I think definitely, even in your own mind, getting it straight that you're not telling the truth. I don't think any of us can tell the truth. So, I mean, that happens to be my particular point of view about it. So get it very straight that this is not the truth. This is the way this happened to me. This is the way I perceive this happening to me. And I think that owning that helps other people be more comfortable. When you say, you didn't do this to me, but I chose to see, I mean, well, abuse is a tough thing. I've taught a lot of students who've written about abuse, but I still say to them, you have, and they don't like it. I say to them, you have to own your own, you have to take ownership of this story. This is your story about what happened.
And do you recommend that sometimes they change names or places slightly manipulate the story in order to tell the truth of the story, but not necessarily facts and details as they are. That's what we mean by creative nonfiction. And by the way, my PhD work was in autobiographical studies, and we talk endlessly about memoir and autobiography actually not being the truth at all. That there's a making up of it. Our memories are not good enough to remember all of the truth or all of the facts. And to have it be engaging, we tell certain parts of the story and withhold other parts of the story. Not because we're mischievous or want to do anything wrong, but that's just what storytelling is about. So do you do other things like that with them to deal with those difficult stories?
Yes, definitely. That like Mina, I would say to her, she has so many, she's working with prisoners, etc., whose names they may not want to have out there. I don't know your situation with them, but I would change the names. And I would say at the beginning, I have, with respect to these people's privacy, I have changed the names here. But you can choose what you want to do. You have a question on your lips?
Right, I do. Thank you.
I'm glad.
Yes, I was just curious as when you were saying, when you're writing my perspective on that, is that something that you would put in the beginning of the book so that the writer or the reader would be aware of that before they even start writing? Or because I have so many different scenarios that I'm writing about, different chapters, or do you put it in front of every chapter? Because some people, I've gotten permission to write their story, and other people I haven't, in which case I've changed their name and changed certain little scenarios and that. So
I think you could, each section or each chapter, you could deal with it that way. You say, but you would say it in a creative sort of way.
Well, of course, yes. Yes.
Onus is on you. But just say, with permission to use, or you could say, so-and-so, did this, and then A, B, C, D, E. And then on the people who said, Jeffrey, who we will call Jeffrey. That's one way to say this. Or we can something like that. And so that way your reader gets it that you're using another name. Right. But the other ones that have given you permission, you could just straight ahead write about it.
Straight ahead write about it. That's great. That makes it quite clear. Another question I have is one particular person I'm writing about. I got the permission from one of this person's children to write about it, but there's 4 other children. So and the story, there's some areas that perhaps aren't as positive about the gentleman I'm writing about as could be. So I don't want to offend the other children, but on the other hand, it's a story that I really feel compelled to tell so that other people...
Well, just say what you've just said. Say some of the children, some of so-and-so's children have 4 out of 5, or however much that is.
Right.
Would like to keep the privacy of this individual, so I'm going to use another name. Or, you can say it how you say it. But if that many people are against you using that story, the name, then I would change the name.
Yes.
That way you can tell a story still and get that out there. But at least their name would not be attached to it.
Yes. Okay, that's fine. Laura, did you say?
Did you say that you had just not asked? You only had access to one of the siblings. It wasn't that the others disapproved, but you were anticipating that they might, and you hadn't actually gotten approval of all 5.
No, I haven't, because actually the story is about his relationship with this one particular child. So that's why I asked that one particular child. Yeah. But yes, but that answers my question. Thank you very much, Phyllis. That's great.
Okay, well, and if you feel the need to use her name, then say what you just said. Say this story is about, there are 5 siblings, but it is mainly about this one person, and she has given me permission to write.
Okay.
Again, use your creative uses on that one. But there's a lot of options you can take.
Yes, I hear that. Thank you.
And I think what we're talking about here is being responsible, for lack of a better words, memoirists and autobiographers. There are memoirists and autobiographers out there who throw caution to the wind, right? So I know a little bit about the backstory of Raw Edges. Would you say just a little bit about that book and what specific things that you did in Raw Edges, or even into the mountain? Because I think those were the ones that were a little bit more dicey. And could you explain how and why they were, and what were some of the specific things that you did, if you're willing to say?
Well, it took me about 8 to 10 years to write out Raw Edges, and it was mainly because I kept changing, and my story didn't change, but my view of the story changed. And I think, and in that book, I discover that what Margaret Atwood says, that hell is being locked in your own personal narrative. And that really, it was like, oh my heavens, why didn't I see this a long time ago? Because I had been telling this story of my marriage. I was married for 33 years, and then he wanted to have an open marriage, et cetera, et cetera. And I tried a lot of different things, which I explain in the book. But I did have David Barber, who I was married to for a long time. I had him read the book, and I said, if there's anything in this that offends you or that you want to change, here's your chance. So a few things I changed and a few things I wouldn't have put in. He wanted me to put in. But the main thing was, and then he called me up on the phone and he said, well, there's love after all. And I wrote that, I think, in the ending of the book. Because
that's beautiful.
I let him read it, and I was willing to let my story sit by his story. In other words, they're two different stories of the same event. And I'm sure he would write a different book. But we have to really say, and I have to realize how attached we are to story. And I remember I could tell the story of my marriage and how it broke up and how there are other women, I could really make myself cry every time. And I thought, I'm really tired of this. Why can't I tell this story differently or look at it a new way? And I was able to loosen that attachment that I had. And I don't think I get hurt by that story anymore. So I think writing is a fantastic process where you can kind of say, you can write it until tell it as true as you think you can. Be true to your own thinking. And then you have to, and then somehow let it go.
That's cool.
And I know, but some people don't like that. They just like the attachment to story. So, but I think becoming unattached to your story, and it's not to say you still can't tell it. You can tell it all you want, but it's like, oh, well, this isn't the only story in town. I'm not the only one who suffered this way.
Yeah, you're attached both to the story, the suffering, and your interpretation of the story or what happened. So that made me think also that I would be really interested in why you write memoir, because right then I think, and this is why memoir autobiographies changes too, because your perspective changes as you age or as you get a different perspective on particular life events. But I want to understand, I know Mena wrote hers because she wants to help new nurses. She knows she has this wealth of knowledge and she wants to pass that along and influence. It's an amazing way and reason to write a memoir. Like, it's not memoir, so to say. Hers is more a business book, but it's so autobiographical because she's talking about her relationships with these various patients and their families. So why, Phyllis, do you write memoir autobiography?
Well, I will say right now I'm working on a novel. 3 memoirs is enough. But I loved doing, especially Raw Edges, because that was the hardest one to write. It actually freed me up to be able to write To the Mountain, and those essays came after the fact of Raw Edges. But I think writing helps you see what you think, and it helps you get your story in front of you, and you're going, well, wait a minute, that's maybe not quite how I would tell it. But it makes you more honest with yourself, I think. I liked really telling the truth of how I saw things, I like that. It was kind of like, oh, I get to say this somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe it's only in one book or whatever, but this is how I was affected by this, and this is what I did.
Yeah.
So.
And what I love about you too, Phyllis, is you actually got to, especially in your books, is show another side of yourself, which I think is the comic side of yourself. I think for myself, often when I write, I can be much more humorous than I am in real life. There's something, and I mean, I it's another expression of who you are. So
Right.
what did you want your audience to get out of reading your memoirs, Phyllis? What was the impact that you wanted to have with those? Any one of them or all of them?
I will say that How I Got Cultured were the essays in there were first written as short stories. And so then they gradually evolved into a memoir and into chapters because I write so close to the bone. But there might be a few things in there that are fictional. I won't say it. But Raw Edges, I was really hurting because I had finished this 33-year marriage, and I wanted to explain it, how it happened, and so it's a very serious book in my opinion. And I'm so glad people said, "Gee, this is so different from How I Got Cultured. You were very funny."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well," but I think we move through those phases of our personality, and we are able to express them. And I hope, well, the novel I'm working on is not humorous, but the story is like, I can't believe this is for real. So I'm having a good time doing that.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. So if you were to give, say, 2 pieces of advice for people who are writing either autobiographically or who are writing their autobiography or memoir, what would you tell them are 2 pieces of advice about how to go about doing that? Either you've seen this come up when you've done your own workshops, and I understand you do some small workshops still in Park City about memoir and autobiography. What pieces of advice, the 2 top pieces of advice, would you give them?
Well, first of all, to be honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's being honest with yourself as much as anything. And so many people say to me, "Oh, I can't put that down. What if Jerry reads it, or Sammy, or Lily, or whoever?" And I said, you can always change it. You can always change it, but try to get to the point where you're writing your own truth. And that's of course my approach to the whole thing. And so many people have said to me, "I appreciate your honesty." It's like, whoa, it's so refreshing to have that. Another piece of advice would be to know that you're caught in a story.
Yeah.
Whatever that story might be.
To be self-aware.
To be very self-aware. And again, it's okay to be caught in a story. And it's one reason I went back to the Mormon church is I understood it better than I had before. And I didn't feel like it was dictating to me so much as I was saying this, I can choose to follow this. And again, that may not be the best way to follow that religion, but we do what we can do.
Yeah. And I love that you also mentioned, Phyllis, that you write honestly from the beginning, because I tell people who I work with on their books, if you try to censor yourself as you go, it will hogtie you. It will constipate you. It will frustrate you. It will unnerve you and upset you, or any number of things. So I actually encourage people and practice this myself in my autobiographical writing. Be as straight and honest and open with yourself. You can decide, and I actually work with and help clients often too, or they'll direct me. I'm working with a client right now. He'll say, "No, not going to say it that way." Like he's written something. I decided to, we're not going to say it quite that way. And I'll be saying, like, "Can you tell me a little bit more about this?" Nope. But I think for some of these very challenging stories, they are, in one sense, for the person who's writing them, a healing.
Yeah, they're mostly for that person.
They're mostly for that person. And they're doing it also, from what I can tell, because they believe that they have something, a gift to give the world by telling their story, by being honest when other people are not honest about difficult subjects, about marriage and the the arc of marriage and the requests and those things that we aren't being honest with each other about. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what that's another strategy that I talk with my clients when they're dealing with this, is that just be as open as possible, especially if you're doing it one-on-one and you're really uncomfortable. But when I do it in small groups, then they know that the group keeps the confidence also and gives them feedback about it.
And again, you can always go back and you can say, I don't wish to have that out there. But your first draft, be as honest as you can, kind of let loose and let it really be.
Mm-hmm.
And one piece of advice I offer to my students is, the first time you say something will be the cliched time.
Uh-huh.
You will have said this before, you would have heard it before, so keep after that same thing, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times,
Mm-hmm.
until you get closer and closer and closer. It's almost like getting close to a gold mine in a gold vein in a mine or something like that. But understand that your first draft is not necessarily going to be the best.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. Nina, do you have anything else you'd like to ask Phyllis?
I really thank you for your points, and I think the honesty with yourself. It was just a comment, really. I just really have it that brings you close to really writing your truth, is when you find that honesty within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I found I was writing the book more for myself. Oh, not more for myself, but as much for myself as I was for those that are going to read it.
Right.
And
that's good.
It wasn't about what I thought they needed to read. It was more about what I needed to write. And I know it's going to be perfect for what they are going to read. So thank you for your input. It was very helpful. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. I look forward to your work.
Yeah. And as I think about working with Mena on her story, I saw her and watched her and worked with her through those various stories and going, oh, aha. I mean, I could see Mena. We talk about, especially, for example, when Mena became personally involved, because how could you not when you're working with people in such difficult, trying circumstances, both the patient who's dealing with dying and their family members. And as a compassionate nurse and person, how could you not at some point do what she called getting on the patient's dance floor? That's what she was told in nursing school. Don't ever get on a patient's dance floor. And so she had to think through that issue about how and why she actually did get on the dance floor with at least 2 of her patients and remains in contact with them. And it's not necessarily something she would advise people to do. You have to be thoughtful about it, right, Mena?
That's right. Yes, for sure.
But it's not uncommon, and it's something. But through writing the book, she was able to really, I think, tell me if I'm incorrect, Mena, or adjust this.
No, I think you're doing well.
I don't mean to be answering for you, but this is the thing that I say. Writing is thinking. Let's think together. And writing is not necessarily a solitary act too, but you're writing to think through some things as well, to discover what you know. And you mentioned that earlier, Phyllis, that's another reason to write, that it's as much for you. Do you want to mention anything else, Mena, about that personal, about what it was like to write about those 2 people who you became close to?
Well, the 2 were 2 young women, and the relationship I had with them has given me so much more of a relationship with all my patients, because I did allow myself to go onto their dance floor, and now I can look at patients and talk to them without stepping on their dance floor, but still being able to give that part of myself that can help them. And it's incredible to continue the relationship with their families. It is a real blessing in my life, and I trust that I am still there for them as I was when their family members were my patients. But it is a difficult decision to make, but I'm glad I made it. It was for the best, all of us.
And Maina, just to add to that, I think what's important for my clients to know is that you actually, not only were you thinking about, you made that choice to get on the dance floor, but you made the choice to talk about it in your book.
Yes.
Knowing that this is a complex issue in some ways, and what kind of advice would you give new nurses? Dance, get on their dance floor or not. So you had to think through that,
Yes,
how you would represent that experience in writing, because you know that your book is going to influence people and you mean it to be. So you want to be responsible about that. So you had to think through that also, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
So, well, this has been great. Phyllis,
I just want to
thank
say
you.
one thing.
Please.
If you don't write your story, nobody else will.
That's the
So,
perfect
go for it.
wrap up for this. It's actually true, and I think about it myself. There are stories I still have to tell, and I want to tell them because nobody else will tell them, or at least they won't tell them the way I will. That would be biography, and I'll bet anything anybody's ever written about me, I'm always like, it's Florida.
Florida, right?
All of that, right? So, Maina, thanks for coming to
Thank you.
and talking with Phyllis. And
Nice to be you, Maina.
Yes, and you too, Phyllis, and thank you.
Yeah, and I hope
never met anybody this way before.
Is that cool? I know that myself. I'll probably do a bit more of it. And thank you for doing this, Phyllis. I will let people know about this recording, and I think you've given a lot of good direction and for other people who are coming up against this issue. So thanks for being with me today. Okay?
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.